Hey guys, and welcome to the end of another Geek-A-long year. We have a brand new join to show you this year. I think you're really gonna like it. It utilizes the double-sided knitting that you're already doing, and then we're gonna do a 3-needle bind off to polish it off. You're gonna need 2 pairs of circular needles. I'm using contrasting ones today so that you'll be able to see the difference between them. So I'm gonna use metal needles on one side, wooden needles on the other. Otherwise, they're the same needle, okay? So we're gonna pick up one square on one needle. We're going to pick up a second square on a second needle, and then we'll join them together. Alright guys, in order to do this tutorial, I have put together 4 mini Geek-A-long squares. These are just made from essentially quarters of the 2014 size. So each square is 22 stitches wide and 27 rows tall, okay? You're going to be doing this on your actual Geek-A-long squares, but you might decide that you'd like to whip up a few of these itty bitty ones and try it first. Okay, so we're going to start with just one at a time. In total, the tools that we'll be using, sorry, a cat's joining our video. In total, the tools that we're going to be using are 2 pairs of circular needles. I'm using size 6, which is the size I use to knit these squares, okay? So you're going to use the same size circulars that you use to make your squares. I have 2 pairs. I'm also going to be using 1 double pointed needle. It is not especially important what size this needle is. I happen to have a size 6 on hand, but as long as it's not freakishly large or small, you're really just fine. I'm going to be using 1 crochet hook. Again, size does not really matter here because we're not going to be making any actual stitches with it. We're just going to use it to conveniently grab our yarn, okay? I, of course, have some scissors and the yarn that I'm using to do my joints. I have my working yarn, my crochet hook. If this is the edge that I'm going to join to another square, I'm going to pick up right here at this bottom corner. I'm going to stick my hook through from front to back, coming between the second and the first row here at the end, right? So there's this row all the way on the end and then the first one in. I'm going to stick my hook between them and go all the way through to the back. On the back, my hook's going to come out in the same place between that first and the second row. What's going to happen is this first row, which isn't quite as attractive, is going to get eaten up by the join, so you'll just have a nice clean edge, okay? So using my hook, I'll grab the yarn and pull it all the way through the square. I'm going to tie it off in a regular knot. You don't need to get fancy here, and you don't need to worry about working in this end. Because the join itself is done in double-sided knitting, we'll be able to just pull the end in with a crochet hook when we're done. All right? Stick your hook back through the exact same spot and grab the yarn again to make a loop. We're going to slip that loop onto our needle. And here's where things get exciting. This is what's going to give you the stitches to make it a double-sided join. I'm going to do a yarn over for every stitch that I pick up. So bring your yarn forward from back to front, over the top of the needle, and back around to the back, okay? So to show you again, the yarn comes forward under the needle, over the top of the needle, and back to the back of your work. I'm going to pick up every other stitch moving up this row, okay? So I told you that I have 27 rows here. That last one is a bind off, so I'm going to work with the number 26. Just always give yourself an even number. Life will be easier. 26, half of that is 13. So I'm going to pick up exactly 13 stitches, and each one will have its own yarn over, so that'll make a total of 26 on my needle when I'm done picking up. Okay? So that's 1. Yarn over 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Right? My last stitch there was a yarn over. So I'm going to go ahead and set my crochet hook aside. I should have 26 stitches on my needle at this point, okay? It is worth counting as you're doing them and making sure that you pick up the same number of stitches for each square. Otherwise, your bind off becomes kind of a headache. If you have 1 or 2 extra or fewer stitches on any given needle, it gets to be kind of a hassle there. I'm going to turn my work, so now I'm looking at the wrong side, which looks a little bit funky right now, but don't worry about it because once we get a row of stitches on there, it'll look really clean. Now, that last stitch was a yarn over, okay? That's hard to knit into because it's all loosey-goosey. What I'm going to go ahead and do here is take it off and just cast on 1 stitch to replace it, just using a backwards loop cast on. So all I did was make a little loop, put it on there and pull it tight, right? So as I was doing mine, I did that final yarn over to remind myself that I needed the stitch there, but then when I turn it, I just put a regular stitch on so I have something easy to knit into. I'm actually going to work in double-sided knitting across the row. See how nice that looks, right? I'm going to turn, looks nice on the other side too, and I'm going to work a second row of double-sided knitting. For my blanket, I chose to do 2 rows of double-sided knitting for each of my vertical joins and 1 row of double-sided knitting for each of my horizontal joins. Ultimately, it's up to you. It boils down to how thick you want it. You know what your gauge is. You can even eyeball it at this point and see how much it's going to add. And remember, of course, that you'll be adding this to both of the squares, so it'll double. Okay? So for mine, I decided to work that extra row across just for this tutorial. I'm not going to, but work as many rows of double-sided knitting as you want to. The final step before we pick up another square is I'm going to K2 tog across. It does not matter if you do this on the right side or the wrong side. It's a personal preference. I'm doing it on the right side, which means my purl bump is going to be on the wrong side. If I did it on the wrong side, my purl bump, see right here, purl bump, would be on the right side. It really just boils down to whichever you prefer, okay? So I'm knitting 2 together all the way across, decreasing my total stitch count by half and closing the double-sided knitting. So when I'm done, I will have 13 stitches left on my needle. I'm gonna go ahead and cut my yarn and leaving these live stitches on the needle, I'm gonna set it aside and I'm gonna grab the square that it's getting joined to. All right, so now what I've got is 2 squares, both of them with right sides facing right now. The red on this one is the right side, the black is the right side on this guy. And I've put 1 row of double-sided knitting on each one, okay? On this second square, I started at the top of the square and worked down. On the first square, I started at the bottom of the square and worked up, okay? I did not break my working yarn. After finishing the second square, I left it on there, so it's 1 less knot to tie. You might choose to break it and do all of your double-sided pickups and then do all of your bind-offs. I did my bind-offs as I went along. All right, so they're both on these handy-dandy circular needles. What I'm gonna do is lay them on top of each other so that the right sides are sandwiched in the middle, okay? So I have wrong side and wrong side. So it's the wrong side that's facing me as I work on this. Here's my working yarn, okay? And I'm gonna pull the cables on my circular needles to get them back up on the needle so that the point of the needle is over here by my working yarn. It doesn't honestly matter very much if your working yarn is in the front or in the back. Some tutorials will tell you has to be in the back, but frankly all you need to do to put it in the back is move it like that. So what are you gonna do? Don't make things complicated. We're gonna use that double pointed needle, okay? You could theoretically just use a 3rd cable needle or a 3rd circular needle if that's what you have hanging around. We don't actually need the double points on this necessarily. It's just easier to work with a little needle as we go through. So again, my right sides are facing in, right? This in here is the right side. This is the wrong side. The wrong side needs to be facing you or else your joint will look a little like, I don't know. I think the back of it isn't quite as pretty as the front of it. So if you do it this way, the less pretty part will be to the back. All right. So I'm going to use my double pointed needle and I'm going to put it through the first stitch on each needle. We're essentially going to do a K2 tog all the way across, okay? So it's, again, I'm putting it knitwise through the front needle, knitwise through the stitch on the back needle, okay? Take my working yarn, knit through, and slip both of those needles, or both of those stitches off the needle. So now I have 1 fewer stitch on each of my circular needles and 1 stitch on my double pointed needle. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to knit the first stitch off each needle together, slip them off. I have 2 stitches on my double pointed needle. Using either one of your circular needles does not matter. You're going to grab the back stitch on your double pointed needle and slip it over the front stitch. And now there's 1 stitch. And you want to be kind of loosey-goosey with this as you go across so you don't have a join that's just super, super tight and rigid, okay? So again, I'm knitting 2 together, slip them off. Now there's 2 stitches on my double pointed needle. I'll pass the first stitch over the front, back, the first stitch over the second stitch, and now there's 1. I'm going to do that all the way to the end. Here's a fun fact, guys. We haven't announced what the yarn is for next year's Geek-A-long yet. These squares are made out of it. So if any of you want to zoom in real tight and see if you can figure out what we're using, I guess that's your first spoiler for next year. New yarn, and you're looking at it. We're going to be making that announcement soon. The yellow that I'm using for the join is coincidentally still the Cascade Sport that we used for the 2015 blanket. It just contrasted nicely with my red and my black. when you're done, you should have just one stitch left on that double pointed needle, right? You've got an end floating around. These are the ends from picking up the stitches. I like to actually just tie them together for an added bonus security at my join, right? Go ahead and snip your working yarn, leave yourself a little tail. Pull the tail through that last loop, and pull it tight. Ta-da! Look at how nice that is. Opens just like a book. Looks really nice and clean, okay? I recommend playing with it a little bit, seeing which side you like better. Do you like to have the purl bump from doing your K2 tog across on your pickup on the right side or the wrong side? Just play with it and see what works for you. I like the way this looks. Looks nice. I actually think it looks a bit like a crocheted join, but you can see those knit stitches in there. So it's kind of cool. All right. Okie doke. So the next thing that you're gonna do is pick up, right, to do your horizontal. So if these are my vertical squares, this is top, this is the bottom. Now I need to pick up here along the bottom, join more squares to it, but it's the exact same process, right? The only difference is that as you're picking up along the bottom, you're gonna pick up one stitch for every row instead of every other stitch, okay? So let me show you that real quick. And the reason we do that, by the way, is because knit stitches are wider than they are tall. So you don't need as many when you're going this way, but we're gonna do one each along the bottom. So I turned it, I'm picking up along the bottom, but I like it facing the top for me. That's a little easier to work with. And you're working exactly like before. I'm gonna pick up between the rows. So all I did was I stuck my hook between the first and second row, pull it through, just tie a little knot, and again, we can just easily pull that right into our double-sided knitting later. Okay, got my loop, stick it on a needle, yarn over. And again, that yarn over comes to the front, underneath the needle, over the top, and around the back, okay? And just coming between each row, I'll pick up one stitch, and make one yarn over for every row. Okay, and after that, it's really just the exact same process you had on these vertical joins. There's absolutely no change at all. I'm going to pick them up across. I'll work a row of double-sided knitting. I'll knit two together across, right, so that I have half the number of stitches again. I'll cut my yarn and set it aside. I'll grab two more squares, do it again, and do that 3 needle bind off to join them together. That's all you need to do the 2015 Geek-A-long join. Easy peasy, guys. We haven't decided actually what join we're going to use for 2016 yet, but we'll be in touch. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the join. I hope it goes smoothly for you. I am off to get a little bit of rest before having this baby. I'll see you next year. The 2015 join.
There you go. Good. And action.
So if you're ready, go ahead and zoom on in. We'll get this thing started.